The morning sun crested over the eastern ridge of my property, casting long shadows across fields where generations of my family had worked the land. This ranch was more than 15,000 acres of prime Western territory. It was the physical manifestation of my identity, a legacy built by my grandfather who purchased the original parcel with savings from World War II, expanded by my father through decades of drought and prosperity, and now maintained under my stewardship for the past 15 years. I stepped onto the porch of our family home, a sturdy ranch house built by hand in the 1950s, and surveyed the land that stretched to the horizon. The cattle moved like dark specks against green pastures to the north. The southern acres held hay fields that would feed our livestock through winter. Beyond that, untouched wilderness provided natural habitat for deer, elk, and countless bird species that made our ranch a living ecosystem, not just a business. My morning ritual included coffee on this porch, planning the day ahead while connecting with the land that sustained us. The ranch operations required constant attention: fence maintenance, cattle health, water systems, and seasonal planning all fell on my shoulders with the help of 4 dedicated ranch hands who lived in smaller homes on the property. That particular morning, I noticed new rooftops gleaming in the distance beyond our eastern boundary. The development had been growing steadily for 2 years now. Modern homes with uniform designs and perfectly manicured lawns created a stark contrast to our working ranch landscape. When they first broke ground, I had concerns about how suburban expansion might affect our operations. But I believed in being a good neighbor and maintaining positive relations with the community. The Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association had initially seemed friendly enough. Their board president, Richard Harmon, had invited me to their welcome barbecue when the first residents moved in. I attended out of courtesy, sharing stories about the local history and offering advice about the regional climate. Several homeowners expressed appreciation for the rural character our ranch provided as their scenic backdrop. The relationship began to shift 6 months ago when Richard was replaced by new HOA President Gerald Thompson. He arrived with a team of board members who had backgrounds in real estate development and local politics. Their cordial invitations to community events stopped. Instead, I began receiving certified letters requesting information about my property boundaries, water usage, and land use permits. Linda from the post office handed me another certified letter that morning. "Third one this month from that HOA," she noted with concern in her voice. "Everything all right, Mark?" "Just bureaucratic nonsense," I replied, tucking the envelope into my jacket pocket without opening it. I had more pressing matters: a cattle auction in the neighboring county and irrigation systems that needed repair before the summer heat intensified. I did notice unusual activity that spring. Unknown vehicles parked along access roads adjacent to my property. Men in business attire photographing boundary markers. County vehicles making unscheduled visits to inspect what they vaguely described as environmental compliance. Each incident seemed minor in isolation, but collectively formed a pattern I chose to ignore, focused instead on the demanding work of running the ranch. Looking back, the signs were clear as daylight. The strange paperwork, the surveys, the change in neighbor relations, all warning signals flashing red. But like many warnings in life, they become obvious only in hindsight. I was too consumed with preserving my family legacy to recognize those who were actively working to take it from me. The storm was not coming. It had already arrived, and I had mistaken the first raindrops for ordinary spring weather. The cattle auction had gone better than expected. I had secured fair prices for 20 head of cattle and purchased 2 new breeding bulls with bloodlines that would strengthen our herd. The drive back to the ranch took nearly 3 hours, giving me time to plan improvements to our operation. With the profits from the auction, I could finally upgrade the irrigation system for the eastern hay fields, making us less dependent on unpredictable rainfall patterns. As my truck crested the final hill overlooking the ranch, something immediately looked wrong. 3 white vans with corporate logos were parked near my eastern fence line. Men in hard hats walked the property, driving stakes into the ground with bright orange tape fluttering in the breeze. My tires kicked up dust as I accelerated down the dirt road, anger and confusion rising in my chest. I slammed the truck door as I approached a man holding a digital surveying device. "What exactly is happening on my property?" I demanded, standing squarely between him and the stake he was about to hammer into my pasture. The surveyor, a young man with a clipboard and safety vest, looked genuinely confused. "Your property, sir. We have permits and authorization to begin preliminary work for Willowbrook Estates Phase 3. This land was purchased by West Ridge Development Corporation last quarter." My mind struggled to process his words. There must be some mistake. This ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. I never sold an inch of it. The surveyor reached into his truck and produced a sheaf of documents protected in a plastic sleeve. "All I know is what I have in the work order, sir. According to this, the entire parcel was acquired 90 days ago. We have county approval to proceed with development planning." I snatched the papers from his hand, scanning documents that contained impossible information. A deed transfer bearing what appeared to be my signature. County stamps validating the transaction. Corporate filings showing plans for Willowbrook Grand expansion, with hundreds of homes plotted directly over pastures where my cattle currently grazed. "This signature is not mine," I said, my voice barely controlled. "Someone forged this document. This is fraud." The surveyor shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, that is beyond my job description. We just follow the work orders. Maybe you should contact the county recorder or get a lawyer involved." I ordered them off my property immediately, threatening to call the sheriff if they did not comply. They reluctantly packed their equipment, clearly uncertain about the situation but unwilling to risk confrontation. As their vans disappeared down the access road, I raced to my truck and drove straight to the county records office, the forged documents clutched in my trembling hand. The following hours blurred into a nightmare of bureaucratic indifference. The county recorder showed me official records confirming my worst fears. According to their system, the ranch had indeed been sold through a complex series of transactions involving multiple limited liability companies. The paper trail was confusing, but eventually led to a holding company with direct connections to the Willowbrook HOA board members. "I never authorized any of this," I insisted repeatedly to indifferent officials. "These signatures are forgeries. I need to reverse this immediately." The county clerk merely shrugged. "If you believe there is fraud involved, that is a legal matter. The county simply records transactions that come through proper channels with notarized signatures. You will need to consult an attorney." By late afternoon, I sat in the office of Patricia Winters, a property attorney with 30 years of experience. Her face grew increasingly grave as she examined the documents I had collected. "They exploited a boundary dispute from the 1970s, she explained, pointing to obscure legal filings. "Your grandfather settled a minor acreage disagreement with a neighboring property, but the resolution was never properly recorded. They used that technical opening to create a chain of title questions, then pushed through rapid transfers between shell companies to obscure what was happening." "Can we stop this?" I asked, desperation evident in my voice. Patricia removed her glasses, her expression grim. "Mark, This is sophisticated fraud, but they have created a paper trail that appears legitimate to the casual observer. Even more concerning, they have already sold parcels of your ranch to developers who may claim to be innocent third parties. This will not be a simple or quick legal battle. As darkness fell, I drove slowly back to the ranch, my headlights illuminating a row of idle bulldozers parked just beyond my property line. They seemed monstrous in the twilight, mechanical predators waiting to devour everything my family had built. Through my truck window, I could see lights on in the ranch house, the home where I was born, where my father died, where every significant memory of my life was contained within its walls. My phone rang, displaying a number I did not recognize. The voice on the other end identified himself as a representative of West Ridge Development. Just a courtesy call to remind you that the property transfer includes a 30-day vacancy provision. We expect the main residence and outbuildings to be emptied by the end of next month, he stated without emotion. I ended the call without responding, unable to form words as the full weight of what was happening crushed down upon me. My home, my livelihood, my heritage, my future, all stolen through paperwork and legal manipulation. I parked beside the house that was suddenly no longer legally mine and felt something fundamental break inside me. The emergency injunction hearing was scheduled for 7:30 in the morning, just 10 days after discovering the fraud. Patricia had worked around the clock preparing motions to halt any development activity while we contested the fraudulent land transfer. I arrived at the courthouse wearing my only suit, purchased years ago for my father's funeral, and now slightly too tight at the shoulders. The courtroom felt hostile from the moment I entered. West Ridge Development had sent 3 attorneys in expensive suits, each armed with leather portfolios and digital tablets. Behind them sat Gerald Thompson, the HOA president, looking smug and confident beside 2 other board members I recognized from community gatherings. Judge William Hargrove entered the courtroom and immediately demonstrated an impatience that seemed targeted specifically at our case. When Patricia attempted to present evidence of the forged signatures, the judge repeatedly interrupted her. "Counselor, these are serious allegations that require substantial evidence," Judge Hargrove stated, barely glancing at the documents Patricia had submitted. "What I see is a property transaction that followed standard protocols and was properly recorded. Your Honor, if you examine the signature comparison and the timeline of events," Patricia began, but the judge cut her off again. "The court is not a handwriting analysis laboratory, Ms. Winters. If your client failed to protect his interests during a legitimate business transaction, that is hardly grounds for an emergency injunction that would cost the developers thousands of dollars per day in delays." The hearing lasted less than 30 minutes. Judge Hargrove denied our motion for an injunction, citing insufficient evidence of wrongdoing and the potential economic harm to third-party developers who had invested in good faith. As the gavel struck, Gerald Thompson smiled directly at me before turning to shake hands with his attorneys. Outside the courtroom, Patricia looked stunned. In 30 years of practice, I have never seen a judge dismiss evidence so quickly without proper review. Something is very wrong here. Within days, we learned what that something was. A private investigator Patricia hired discovered that Judge Hargrove's brother-in-law was a silent investor in West Ridge Development, and that the judge himself had attended fundraising events hosted by Gerald Thompson for local political candidates. The system was not merely failing to protect me, it was actively working against me. More disturbing revelations followed. Several of my neighbors who had initially seemed sympathetic to my situation suddenly became unavailable or distant. The investigator discovered that 5 neighboring property owners had received generous easement payments from West Ridge in exchange for not opposing the development plans. They created a network of complicity, Patricia explained during a strategy meeting in my kitchen. People who might have spoken up have been financially incentivized to look the other way. The legal bills mounted with each filing. Patricia believed in my case, but could not work entirely on contingency for what was becoming a protracted legal battle. I was forced to sell off breeding stock at below-market prices to generate immediate cash. Each trip to the bank revealed dwindling resources as the legal system ground slowly forward, while development preparations continued unabated. The final blow came in the form of an official eviction notice, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who could not meet my eyes as he handed me the document. 30 days to vacate, he mumbled, clearly uncomfortable with his role in what he suspected was wrong. Sorry, Mark, just doing my job. I stood in my driveway watching him drive away, holding the paper that legally stripped me of my home. Inside, cardboard boxes had begun to accumulate as I faced the unbearable task of dismantling 3 generations of life on this land. Where would I go? What would happen to the remaining cattle? How could I possibly move 60 years of accumulated family possessions in 30 days? That evening, the private investigator delivered his most damning report yet. County Commissioner Helen Rodriguez, who had approved the expedited permits for the development, had a daughter who worked for the law firm representing West Ridge. The county surveyor who validated the property boundaries had received consulting fees from an LLC connected to Gerald Thompson. Even the notary who had allegedly witnessed my signature on the transfer documents was the sister of an HOA board member. Rain pelted against the windows as I sorted through old photographs spread across the dining room table. Images of my grandfather standing proudly before newly acquired pasture land. My father teaching me to ride my first horse. My own efforts modernizing the cattle operation and restoring native grasslands. Each photograph represented not just a memory, but a physical place on the ranch that would soon be transformed into cookie-cutter housing. The weight of defeat pressed down on me as I placed each photo into boxes, my movements mechanical and numb. The ranch operations had effectively ceased. 2 of my 4 ranch hands had already found other employment, unable to wait for a legal resolution that seemed increasingly unlikely. The cattle would need to be sold at whatever price I could get. The equipment would go next, then the furniture. And finally, I would be forced to walk away from the only true home I had ever known. That night, I sat alone in the darkened house, listening to rain drumming on the roof that had sheltered my family for decades. For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to weep openly, grieving not just for my loss, but for the seeming triumph of corruption over justice. The attic of the ranch house had always been a repository for family history, a place where documents and mementos accumulated across decades like geological layers. With eviction looming, I needed to sort through these archives, preserving what was irreplaceable and discarding what could not be moved. The pull-down ladder creaked under my weight as I ascended into the dusty space beneath the rafters. Sunlight filtered through a small round window, illuminating dancing dust motes in golden shafts. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall, their olive green paint chipped and faded. These contained the business records of the ranch, methodically maintained first by my grandfather, then my father, and finally by me. Cardboard boxes held photographs and correspondence from earlier eras. Near the chimney stack stood a leather steamer trunk I had not opened since inheriting the property. Working methodically through the filing cabinets, I created piles for documents to save, destroy, or review more carefully. The mundane business of ranching life passed through my hands: feed invoices, cattle lineage records, equipment maintenance logs, tax filings from decades past. Hours blended together in the stifling heat of the attic as afternoon stretched toward evening. Near the back of the final drawer, my fingers touched something different, a leather portfolio secured with a brittle leather strap. The portfolio contained documents I had never seen before, written in my grandfather's precise handwriting on parchment that had yellowed with age. The title page read, "Water Rights and Mineral Claims, Established 1937. I carried the portfolio downstairs to the kitchen table and began examining its contents under better light. The documents detailed extensive water rights dating back to territorial days, before state incorporation. Maps showed underground aquifers and natural springs located throughout the property. Most significantly, the documentation established that these water rights were filed separately from the land deed itself, registered independently with authorities that preceded modern county government. Adding to this revelation were detailed records of mineral rights claims, also filed separately from the main property deed. My grandfather had secured these rights through a different legal process, ensuring they would remain with our family regardless of any future land transactions. My hands trembled as I realized the potential significance of these documents. In my region, water rights often superseded land ownership, particularly when established through historical claims predating modern property law. Could these century-old papers offer leverage against the developers who had stolen my land? The next morning, I drove to meet with Martin Reynolds, an attorney specializing in natural resources law. His office walls displayed environmental impact awards and framed articles about landmark water rights cases he had won. When I placed my grandfather's portfolio on his desk, Martin's expression shifted from professional courtesy to intense interest. "These are extraordinary documents," he said, carefully turning the brittle pages. "The water rights established here were registered under territorial law and appear to have never been transferred or amended, and they specifically cover underground aquifers that likely extend well beyond your original property boundaries." Martin pulled up satellite imagery on his computer screen, overlaying it with geological survey maps. Based on these coordinates, the aquifers and water sources documented here are the primary water supply for the entire region, including the Willowbrook Estates development. "What does that mean legally?" I asked, hope flickering for the first time in weeks. "It means that regardless of who owns the surface land, you potentially control the water rights underneath it. In this state, that gives you enormous leverage. Without access to these water sources, those homes would be virtually uninhabitable." Further investigation revealed additional critical facts. The access roads leading to the Willowbrook Estates crossed corners of the ranch through easements that had been established for agricultural use only. These easements had specific language restricting their conversion to residential access, without explicit permission from the easement grantor, my family. Most damning of all, Martin's research into the HOA's incorporation documents revealed fatal flaws in their legal foundation. The original HOA charter contained language requiring all property transfers to be approved by a specific percentage of homeowners, a requirement that had been blatantly ignored in orchestrating the fraudulent acquisition of my ranch. "They were so focused on stealing your land that they overlooked these critical details," Martin explained, spreading the documents across his conference table. "The water rights alone would require them to negotiate with you, but combined with the easement restrictions and the HOA charter violations, we have the foundation for a multi-pronged legal counterattack." For the first time since discovering the theft of my ranch, I felt something other than despair. These yellow documents, preserved by my grandfather's meticulous record-keeping, offered a path forward that the conspirators had never anticipated. They had stolen my land but had failed to secure the rights that made that land valuable. "What is our next step?" I asked, a new determination hardening my voice. Martin smiled, gathering the documents into organized piles. "We assemble the right team and prepare for battle. They thought they were buying land. What they actually bought was a legal nightmare." The conference room of Reynolds Legal Associates transformed into our strategic command center over the following weeks. Martin had assembled a team of specialists whose expertise would be crucial to our counteroffensive. Jessica Park, an expert in water rights litigation with 3 decades of experience. Daniel Acre, a corporate attorney specializing in homeowners association law. And Elena Vasquez, a former prosecutor who now focused on real estate fraud cases. "The beauty of our position," Martin explained as we gathered around maps and documents spread across the table, "is that we can fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. Each of these legal challenges would be formidable on its own. Combined, they create an overwhelming pressure point." The strategy took shape methodically. Jessica would handle the water rights claims, filing documentation to assert control over the aquifers and springs that supplied the entire region. Daniel would challenge the HOA actions based on charter violations and improper procedures. Elena would build a case against the individuals involved in the fraudulent transfers, gathering evidence for both civil action and potential criminal charges. "We work on contingency," Martin assured me, understanding my financial constraints. "We believe in this case enough to invest our time now for a percentage of the recovery later." While the legal team prepared filings, I pursued another avenue that Martin had suggested. County tax records revealed that several properties owned by HOA board members, including Gerald Thompson, had outstanding tax liens from previous years. At a little publicized county tax auction, I used the last of my savings to purchase the tax certificates on these properties. This gave me the right to initiate foreclosure proceedings if the taxes remained unpaid for a specified period, a ticking clock that the board members did not yet realize was counting down. "This gives us additional leverage," Martin noted when I reported my purchases. "These certificates can be converted to ownership under specific circumstances. At minimum, they create financial pressure on key players." Our strategy extended beyond legal maneuvers. Martin arranged meetings with neighboring ranchers and landowners who had grown concerned about aggressive development threatening their own properties. Many had initially remained silent, fearing they might face similar tactics if they opposed the HOA and its politically connected allies. "They stole your land today, but yours will not be the last property they target," I explained at a gathering in the barn of the Peterson family, whose ranch adjoined mine to the north. "This is about more than just my fight. This is about whether we allow corruption to determine the future of this entire region." Support gradually coalesced. Farmers and ranchers agreed to provide affidavits about suspicious activities they had witnessed. Retired county employees came forward with accounts of being pressured to expedite permits for West Ridge developments. Even some Willowbrook residents, disturbed by rumors of fraudulent activities by their HOA board, began asking uncomfortable questions at community meetings. Martin also developed a careful media strategy. Rather than making accusations publicly that might trigger defamation claims, we provided selected journalists with public records and documentation that allowed them to draw their own conclusions. Stories began appearing in local newspapers questioning the rapid approval process for the development expansion, and noting the connections between county officials and West Ridge development. "Never make allegations we cannot prove," Martin cautioned as we reviewed press coverage. "Let the documents and public records tell the story. The truth is damning enough without embellishment." Throughout this period, Gerald Thompson and the HOA board maintained their arrogant posture. When Martin sent formal notices regarding the water rights claims, their attorney responded with dismissive letters suggesting such claims were obsolete and unenforceable. When questions arose about easement restrictions, they asserted that development plans would proceed regardless of trivial technical objections. "Their overconfidence works to our advantage," Jessica observed during a strategy session. "They believe their political connections insulate them from consequences. They are not preparing adequate legal defenses because they cannot imagine they will need them." By the 6th week of preparation, our legal arsenal was complete. Multiple filings had been prepared for simultaneous submission across different jurisdictions and agencies. The water rights documentation had been authenticated by state historical preservation experts. The easement restrictions had been confirmed by independent surveyors. The HOA charter violations had been documented with affidavits from homeowners who had never been consulted about the acquisition of my ranch. On a clear autumn evening, I stood at the boundary of what had once been my property, watching the sunset cast long shadows across land that had sustained my family for generations. Construction equipment remained positioned for work scheduled to begin the following week. Lights glowed in the windows of Willowbrook Estates homes, residents largely unaware of how their HOA leadership had compromised their community's future. "Tomorrow everything changes," I said quietly to Martin, who had joined me for this moment of reflection before the battle began in earnest. "They built their scheme on sand," he replied, "and the tide is coming in." Dawn had barely broken when our coordinated offensive began. Process servers delivered thick legal packets to the homes of all 7 HOA board members, catching most of them before their morning coffee. Gerald Thompson reportedly answered his door in a bathrobe, his face transitioning from annoyance to shock as he was served with 5 separate legal actions simultaneously. At precisely 8 o'clock, water utility contractors arrived at the main supply junction serving Willowbrook Estates. Armed with court orders establishing my legal control of the water rights, they installed flow restrictors that reduced the development's water supply to the minimum legally required, sufficient for basic household needs, but not for landscaping, swimming pools, or other non-essential uses. "We are simply enforcing established water rights allocations," the contractor explained to bewildered homeowners who gathered to watch the work. "The full documentation is available through the State Water Authority." By 9:30, security contractors began installing gates at the critical access points where roads to Willowbrook crossed my easements. Signs posted at each gate detailed the specific hours when passage would be permitted, notably excluding the 8:00 a.m. to 5:00 p.m. window when construction crews normally operated. Construction vehicles already on site found themselves unable to exit for refueling or supply runs, effectively stranding equipment worth millions of dollars. The Willowbrook HOA emergency meeting convened at noon in their community clubhouse. Through sources among concerned residents, we received real-time updates about the chaotic scene unfolding inside. Gerald Thompson attempted to maintain control of the meeting, but faced increasingly hostile questions from homeowners who had awakened to reduced water pressure and news of multiple legal actions against their community. "What exactly did you do with our HOA dues?" demanded one resident, waving a copy of a newspaper article questioning the financial arrangements behind the ranch acquisition. "Did you use our money to fund this land grab without our approval?" Television news crews arrived by early afternoon, capturing footage of contractors installing the access gates and interviewing confused residents. When reporters approached Gerald Thompson as he left the contentious meeting, his face flushed with anger as he shouted, "No comment," before rushing to his car. At the county administration building, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense as the day progressed. 3 commissioners who had approved the expedited permits for West Ridge development found themselves besieged by reporters asking about their connections to the development company. By mid-afternoon, the county administrator announced that several officials would recuse themselves from any further decisions regarding the disputed property pending resolution of legal questions. Martin called me with updates throughout the day as our strategy unfolded. "The foreclosure notices based on the tax certificates have been filed against Thompson and 2 other board members," he reported. "Their mortgage lenders have already contacted our office, expressing serious concerns." By evening, the impact of our coordinated actions had created a cascade of consequences for those who had orchestrated the theft of my ranch. Title insurance companies, alarmed by the legal challenges to the property transfer, issued stop-work notices to protect their financial interests. Mortgage lenders filed their own motions, seeking to intervene to protect their collateral. Development partners began filing claims against each other as the project ground to a halt. Most satisfying was the news that homeowners within Willowbrook Estates had called for an emergency vote to remove the entire HOA board. Residents who had purchased homes in good faith now found themselves caught in a legal nightmare not of their making, their property values threatened by the actions of leaders they had trusted. The next morning, I watched from a distance as residents of expensive homes struggled with new realities. Sprinkler systems no longer functioned adequately to maintain lush lawns. Construction workers stood idle beside dormant equipment. Property managers fielded angry calls from homeowners demanding explanations for the chaos engulfing their community. Gerald Thompson made one desperate countermove, filing an emergency motion to invalidate our water rights claims. Judge Hargrove, however, had suddenly developed a keen interest in procedural correctness, recusing himself from the case citing appearance of potential conflict after media inquiries about his family connections to West Ridge development. The case was reassigned to Judge Miranda Chen, known for her meticulous review of evidence and intolerance for procedural shortcuts. She scheduled a comprehensive hearing for the following week, requesting complete documentation from all parties. Without their friendly judge to run interference, the HOA's legal position deteriorated rapidly. Local television featured interviews with homeowners who expressed shock at learning their dream homes had been built on fraudulently acquired land. "We saved for years to buy in this community," one resident told reporters. "Nobody told us there were questions about the land titles or water rights. We feel completely betrayed by our HOA leadership." By the end of the week, the first settlement overtures arrived. An attorney representing a faction of HOA residents reached out to Martin, seeking to distance his clients from the actions of the board. "They want to negotiate separately," Martin informed me during our evening briefing. "The community is fracturing as everyone scrambles to protect their own interests, exactly as we anticipated." Gerald Thompson was spotted leaving the county with suitcases, reportedly taking an unplanned vacation, according to an HOA spokesperson. 2 county officials announced early retirement. The development company's stock price dropped 15% in 3 days as investors reacted to news of the legal entanglements. From my temporary apartment in town, I watched the system that had been weaponized against me now work with devastating efficiency in the opposite direction. The intricate legal machinery we had set in motion was dismantling their scheme faster than they could respond, exposing the corrupt foundations upon which they had built their plans. The settlement conference room in the federal courthouse presented a stark contrast to the local courtroom where I had faced defeat months earlier. Polished mahogany tables reflected the serious expressions of attorneys representing multiple parties. The HOA's legal team occupied one side, looking significantly less confident than during our previous encounters. Gerald Thompson was notably absent, having resigned his position following the issuance of subpoenas regarding the fraudulent property transfers. Martin and our legal team had prepared extensively for this negotiation. We entered with leverage created by our multi-pronged strategy and the mounting public pressure against the conspirators. The HOA representatives now faced not just our legal claims, but the wrath of their own residents, whose property values and quality of life had been severely impacted by the board's actions. "Our terms are non-negotiable," Martin stated, sliding copies of our settlement proposal across the table. "Complete restoration of all ranch property to my client, financial compensation for damages incurred, and cooperation with ongoing investigations into criminal conduct related to the fraudulent transfers." The HOA attorney began to object, but was interrupted by a representative from the development company's insurance carrier. "Our preliminary assessment indicates potential liability exceeding $30 million if this proceeds to trial," the insurance representative stated flatly. "We are prepared to meet the core demands regarding property restoration and reasonable damages." By midday, the framework of an agreement had taken shape. All ranch property would be legally returned to me through proper court procedures. Substantial financial penalties would be paid by the development company and the HOA's insurance carriers. The settlement explicitly acknowledged the validity of the historical water rights and easement restrictions that had given us our leverage. 2 weeks later, I stood on a hilltop overlooking my restored property. Survey stakes marking planned subdivisions had been removed. Construction equipment had departed. The land looked wounded in places where preliminary work had begun, but these scars would heal with time and proper stewardship. The legal aftermath extended beyond our civil settlement. The state attorney general, responding to evidence we had provided, filed criminal charges against Gerald Thompson, 2 other HOA board members, and a county commissioner for conspiracy, fraud, and corruption. Their arrests made front-page news, the images of former power brokers in handcuffs sending a powerful message about the consequences of corruption. At a bankruptcy auction for the HOA's common properties, I submitted the winning bid for their clubhouse and recreational facilities. The irony was not lost on observers. The very people who had attempted to steal my ranch now found their community assets legally purchased by the person they had wronged. I immediately donated these properties to a conservation trust, ensuring they would become protected habitat rather than development sites. The restoration of the ranch became my focus in the following months. New fencing marked the original property lines, now secured through additional legal protections to prevent future encroachment. Working with agricultural extension experts, we implemented innovative conservation practices that would make the ranch both more productive and more environmentally sustainable. Some of the Willowbrook residents eventually became allies in creating a more balanced approach to development in the region. A community advisory board formed to explore responsible growth patterns that could accommodate human needs while respecting historical land use and natural resources. Several families who had unwittingly purchased homes built on fraudulently acquired sections of my property received assistance relocating to properly developed areas. On the 1-year anniversary of regaining my ranch, I stood on the same porch where this story began, watching the sun rise over land that remained unbroken by unnecessary development. The legal battle had been costly in many ways, but the principles at stake had justified the fight. My grandfather's foresight in securing separate water rights had provided the leverage needed to overcome a corrupt system that initially seemed unbeatable. The experience had transformed my understanding of both justice and legacy. Justice sometimes requires persistence through apparent defeat, using knowledge and determination to overcome those who rely on power and connection. Legacy involves not just preserving what previous generations built, but actively defending it against modern threats they could never have anticipated. As dawnlight spread across the ranch, illuminating cattle grazing on pastures that had nearly become suburban streets, I felt profound gratitude for the hidden resources, both legal and personal, that had allowed this land to remain whole. The ranch continued, not unchanged but strengthened by having survived an existential threat, its future now protected by legal frameworks designed to withstand challenges that might come with changing times.